When she left me, I didn't just lose a relationship. I lost my footing. I lost the will to get out of bed. I lost that basic feeling that tomorrow could be better, and the cruelest part wasn't the silence after the end, nor the empty house, nor the long nights I spent staring at the ceiling trying to figure out where I went wrong. The cruelest part was realizing that she chose to leave exactly when I needed her to stay the most. I won't say her name here, not out of respect for her, but out of respect for myself, because for a long time I carried the burden of remembering every detail, every word, every promise she made while looking into my eyes. And today, I understand that some things don't deserve to be repeated. They deserve to be overcome. But to get to this point, I had to go through a hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. If you're listening to this now, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you know that pain that doesn't show up on your body, but leaves you breathless. That pain that makes you smile at people at work and, inside, feel like an imposter, because all you wanted was to disappear for a few days, just so you wouldn't have to explain to anyone that you were broken. During that period of my life, I was in what I called the survival phase. I wasn't living, I was just trying to survive. I woke up with a heavy head, as if I had spent the whole night carrying a bag of cement on my back. Sometimes I didn't even sleep properly. And when I did sleep, it was that broken sleep, full of thoughts. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a racing heart, remembering bills, demands, things I had put off, decisions I didn't know how to make. And the strangest thing is that looking from the outside, nothing seemed dramatic enough to justify what I was feeling. I hadn't lost someone to death. I hadn't suffered an accident. I was just drowning, slowly, in silence. And somehow, I learned to do it without drawing attention. I worked. I answered messages. I said, "I'm fine," when someone asked. I laughed at the right jokes. I did the bare minimum to seem normal. But when I came home, it was as if I took off a mask and let a character I had maintained all day fall to the floor. I lived in a simple place, nothing luxurious. A small apartment, with furniture I bought little by little with what I could afford. And I remember that at that time I used to arrive and stand at the door for a few seconds before actually entering. It seemed silly, but it was as if I was preparing myself to face the emptiness, the silence of a place that should be a home, but which, at that moment, seemed only a waiting room for a life that wasn't coming. It was in this setting that she existed in my life. And it was in this setting that she began to change. In the beginning, when I met her, I swear I thought I was lucky. Not movie luck with a soundtrack and a sunset, but that rare luck of finding someone who seemed to understand you without you having to explain too much. She had a way of speaking that made you pay attention, a way of smiling that made you forget for a moment that the world was heavy, and when she looked at me, I felt like I was being seen, truly seen. I've always been a more reserved guy. I was never one to open up easily. I kept things to myself, thinking that was strength, and she seemed to respect that. In the beginning, she didn't pressure me. She just stayed, and over time, I started to trust. I started to share pieces of myself that I had never shared with anyone. I told her about my fears, about the pressure I felt to succeed, about how I felt behind in life, as if everyone else had a map and I was walking in the dark. And she would hold my hand and say I wasn't alone. She said we would build a life together. She said I could rest. I believed her. Because when someone offers you rest at a time when you're constantly tired, that feels like love. And that's when I started doing what many people do without realizing it. I started putting her at the center of everything. I planned my decisions thinking of her. I worked thinking about the future I wanted to offer. I gave up things, time, desires, because I believed that was what a real relationship demanded. And deep down, I was afraid of losing her, afraid of not being enough, afraid of being discarded, as I had already felt discarded in other areas of my life. But even so, I tried to be light-hearted. I tried to be the man she said she believed in. I tried to show that I was strong, even when I was falling apart inside. Life, as always, didn't help. Problems started to pile up. Pressure at work, tight money, that feeling that everything was hanging by a thread. I remember a period when my cell phone became an anxiety clock. Every time it vibrated, I felt a knot in my stomach, because it was almost always another demand. Another, "So, did you solve it?" Another reminder that I was late with something. And in the middle of all that, I had her. At least I thought I did. In the beginning, she still hugged me when I came home with a tired look. She still asked how my day was. She still said everything will be fine. But little by little that started to change. And the change didn't happen all at once. the kind you notice and react to. It happened like a song whose volume is slowly turned down. You only notice when the silence has already taken over. She started to be on her phone more, not the normal use, like answering something or watching a video. It was constant use, as if her attention was always somewhere else. Her laughter was no longer with me. It was for a screen, and when I asked what it was, she said nothing too quickly. That nothing that isn't nothing. It's a closed door. She started saying she was tired, that she needed space, that she wanted to clear her head. And I, as always, tried to understand, tried to give her space, tried to be the mature guy. I said, "It's okay. If you need that, I respect it." But inside, I felt a chill, a bad premonition. It wasn't jealousy. I wasn't a controlling guy. It was instinct. It was as if something was coming undone and I couldn't hold on. There was one specific day I never forgot. I was particularly down. I won't go into details yet, but I was at my limit. I had received news that messed everything up. I sat on the couch, hands shaking, trying to organize my thoughts, and I called her. I needed to talk. I needed a hug. I needed to hear any phrase that would hold me together. She came, but she didn't really come. She sat next to me with her body pointed away, as if she was ready to get up at any moment. I started talking and she responded with and yeah and oh wow, without looking into my eyes, without connecting. In the middle of my speech, her phone vibrated. She looked at it immediately, right away, and her face changed. It wasn't a big smile, but it was a softness I hadn't seen in weeks, an attention I no longer received. She typed quickly, hiding the screen with her own arm. And I stopped talking mid-sentence. A strange silence fell, that kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. I asked, trying to keep my tone light, "Is everything okay?" She looked at me as if I had interrupted something important and replied, "It is. It's just a thing here." I tried to continue talking, but I couldn't anymore, because at that moment, I felt something difficult to explain. I felt like I was competing, and it wasn't a fair competition, because I didn't even know what I was competing against. I went to the bedroom that night with the feeling that I was losing her, and the worst part is that I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know if I should talk, if I should wait, if I should trust, if I should worry. I was stuck in that cycle of thoughts. Maybe it's just a phase, and maybe it's already over and I haven't realized it. I started noticing details I had previously ignored, small inconsistencies, times that didn't match up, mood swings without explanation, the way she avoided the conversation when I asked about her day, the way she got irritated with simple questions, as if I was invading something I had no right to know. And that bothered me because deep down I always thought that if there's one place where you have the right to be vulnerable, it's within your relationship. I always thought that love was precisely that, being able to fall apart without fear of being abandoned, being able to fail without being discarded, being able to be human without being replaced by someone better. But I was discovering that not everyone loves that way. And the more I felt her pulling away, the more I clung on. I tried to please her. I tried to be more present. I brought her small things, tried to surprise her, tried to show that I was still the guy she chose. But there's one thing I learned the hard way. When someone has already decided to leave on the inside, nothing you do on the outside can hold them back. I remember looking at her, sitting at the table on her phone, and feeling an absurd longing. And she was right there in front of me. But she seemed far away, she seemed inaccessible. And that, for me, was one of the worst feelings I've ever experienced, because it's like being hungry and looking at food behind thick glass. You see it, but you can't reach it. And it was there that a question began to hammer inside me day and night, as if it were a warning I didn't want to hear. If she's with me, why do I feel alone? I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, that I was too sensitive because of the bad phase, that it was just stress. I told myself, "You're exaggerating. You're making things up. She loves you. She's just tired." But deep down, I knew. I knew because her gaze was no longer the same. I knew because her touches were mechanical. I knew because her words were empty. And I knew because, when I looked at her, I no longer saw partnership. I saw distance. And distance, when it starts small, seems innocent. But it grows fast. And when you realize it, it has already become an abyss. That week, I started noticing she went out more. She said she was going to sort some things out, that she needed to breathe. And I didn't want to be the guy who suffocates. I didn't want to be the insecure man. So I let her. I said, "Go ahead." I pretended to be calm. I pretended to be mature. But alone, I became chaos. I walked around the house with my phone in my hand, as if I was waiting for a message that never came. I looked at the clock every 5 minutes. I imagined scenarios. I hated myself for imagining, and I hated myself even more for not having the courage to ask directly. Until one night she arrived later than usual, and it wasn't just the time, it was the energy. She walked in and didn't look at me, didn't kiss me, went straight past, and I smelled a different scent, a perfume that wasn't mine, a perfume that wasn't part of our home. I swallowed hard. My heart started beating as if I were running. I tried to stay in control. I said her name. She replied with a short, emotionless, "Hi." And it was at that moment that I understood that my worst fear wasn't losing her. My worst fear was discovering that I had been deceived while I was fragile, while I was at the bottom, while I needed the truth the most. And there, watching her walk away down the hallway, with her phone in her hand and her whole body distant, I felt a heavy certainty inside me. I had no idea what was happening, but I was about to find out, and when I did, nothing would ever be the same. The next day I woke up with that strange feeling of someone who slept little but dreamed too much. A heavy head, a tight chest, a tired body even before getting out of bed. She was still sleeping, turned away, with a physical distance that seemed greater than the actual space between us. I spent a few seconds looking at her back, trying to find some sign there that it was all in my head, some silent proof that I still mattered. I didn't find it. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise. I made a simple coffee, almost automatically, and sat at the table staring at the cup as if it could give me some answer. The silence in the house was heavy. Before, even on bad days, there was conversation, there was exchange, there was presence. Now, it was just a space shared by two emotionally distant people. When she woke up, everything was fast. Shower, clothes, phone in hand. No question about how I was. No curiosity. No pause. She said she was late and left. A kiss on the cheek. One of those that seems more like a social gesture than real affection. And I stayed there alone, trying to understand when we got lost. Throughout the day, while I tried to work, my mind kept going back to the beginning, to the time when she made a point of knowing how I was, to the long conversations, the simple plans, the laughter for no reason. I remembered when she said she liked me precisely because I was real, because I didn't pretend to be something I wasn't. And I wondered at what point that stopped being enough. I always believed that love was partnership, that it was going through bad phases together, that it was holding the other's hand when everything falls apart. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I confused my way of loving with a universal rule. The fact is, while I was sinking into my own problems, I expected her to be my anchor, and little by little, I realized she was becoming just another weight of uncertainty. At times, I even felt ridiculous, as if I were begging for crumbs of attention, and that deeply affected my self-esteem. I kept asking myself if I had changed, if I had become less interesting, less attractive, less worthy of love. I analyzed every word I said, every attitude, trying to find where I had failed. There was one night when I tried to talk seriously, not to accuse, not to pressure, just to talk. I said I felt distant, that I missed us, that I was going through a difficult time and needed support. She listened but didn't hear. She said she was also confused, that she needed time, that she couldn't explain what she was feeling. And she ended the conversation by saying I was too sensitive. That phrase kept echoing inside me for days. Too sensitive. As if feeling pain was a flaw. As if showing fragility was something to be corrected. I started swallowing everything. I stopped talking about what bothered me. I started pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Because somehow I started to feel that my pain pushed her even further away. And the more I kept silent, the more distant she became. I started to notice that she dressed up more to go out than to stay with me, that she smiled more when she was on her phone than when she was by my side, that the sparkle in her eyes appeared for reasons I didn't know, and that created a knot in my stomach that was hard to undo. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was projecting my fears, that I needed to trust. After all, trust was the foundation of everything, wasn't it? But trust is also built with transparency, and transparency was exactly what was missing. The days went by like this, in a fragile balance, sustained more by my denial than by any real sign of security. I kept going to work, solving problems, pretending to be normal. But inside, I was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to maintain something that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. There was a specific moment that marked this phase. a day when I got home early. She hadn't arrived yet. I sat on the couch and waited. Time passed slowly. Every noise in the hallway put me on alert. When I finally heard the door, my heart raced. Not out of joy, but out of tension. She came in, greeted me quickly, and went straight to the bedroom. I followed, trying to start a conversation. I asked how her day had been. She answered vaguely. I asked if everything was okay between us. She sighed deeply, as if she was tired of the question, and said I was pressuring her too much, that I needed to trust her more, that the atmosphere was unbearable. I stood there not knowing what to say, because at that moment I realized a painful thing. I was trying to save something alone, and no relationship survives when only one of the two fights. That night, I slept poorly. I tossed and turned with confused thoughts. I remembered the way she looked at me in the beginning, the way she made me feel important, and I compared it to now, to that distant, almost indifferent presence. The difference hurt. The next day, I started noticing small details that I had completely ignored before. Changed passwords, phone always face down, interrupted conversations when I came near. Subtle, but constant changes. It wasn't concrete proof of anything, but it was a pattern. And patterns don't appear out of nowhere. I felt divided. Part of me wanted to believe that all of this had a simple explanation. Another part, quieter and more uncomfortable, said I was being prepared for a difficult truth. And the more I tried to push that feeling away, the more it grew. I started to wonder if she still saw me as a partner, or just as someone convenient at that moment, someone who was there while she sorted out other things. And that thought gnawed at me, because I had always been proud of being loyal, of being present, of not abandoning those I love when things get tough. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I loved too much at the wrong time. In the midst of all this, my life remained complicated. Problems didn't solve themselves. On the contrary, they piled up. And instead of having a refuge in her, I felt like I was losing the only place where I hoped to find peace. I even thought about breaking up. Not for lack of love, but out of exhaustion. Exhaustion from feeling invisible. Exhaustion from living in doubt. But every time that idea came up, a huge fear came with it. Fear of being completely alone. Fear of confirming that all of this had been real. Fear of facing the emptiness without even the illusion of company. So I stayed. I kept trying. I kept waiting. I kept believing that at some point she would realize how much I was there, how much I needed her, how much I was trying. But while I waited, something was approaching. Something I still couldn't see clearly, but that I felt closer and closer, like a dark cloud on the horizon, silent, inevitable. And I had no idea that the next thing I would discover would not only confirm all my fears, but also push me to the lowest point of my life, because the truth, when it finally appeared, didn't come gently. It came like an impact, and I was completely unprepared for what was about to happen. I found out in the worst possible way. It wasn't a sincere conversation. It wasn't a confession full of guilt. It was chance, that cruel kind of chance that seems to choose the exact moment when you are most fragile to hit you head on. That afternoon, I had left work early. It wasn't common, but I was too exhausted to pretend to be productive. My head wasn't working, my body felt heavy, and all I wanted was to go home and lie down for a bit, try to organize my thoughts. I didn't warn her. I didn't think it was necessary. After all, it was my home too. When I arrived, the apartment was silent. The living room light was off, and for a second I felt a strange relief, as if the silence was better than that distant presence I had been feeling. I left the keys on the table and walked slowly, almost automatically. That's when I heard a laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't exaggerated. It was a short, light, intimate laugh. A laugh I would recognize anywhere. My stomach turned instantly. My whole body went on alert, as if something inside me had understood the situation even before my mind accepted it. The laugh was coming from the bedroom. I stopped in the middle of the hallway. I stood there, motionless, feeling my heart pound so hard it seemed like it wanted to jump out of my mouth. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, pretend I hadn't heard anything. Another part, stronger, more desperate, pushed me forward. I needed to know, even if it hurt, even if it destroyed me. I walked to the door slowly, with steps that seemed to make no sound at all. The door was ajar, enough for me to see. And I saw. She was sitting on the bed, with that smile I hadn't seen in weeks. A loose, genuine smile. Her phone was in her hand, and on the other side of the screen was someone I didn't know. A man. The conversation was on speakerphone, and his voice echoed in the room with an intimacy that left no room for doubt. They weren't saying anything explicit at that moment. They didn't need to. The tone, the pauses, the way she reacted, everything screamed what I had been trying to deny. That wasn't just any conversation. It was complicity. It was connection. It was something that, until recently, was only mine. I felt my legs give way. I leaned my hand on the wall so I wouldn't fall. My vision blurred, as if someone had reduced the focus of the world. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything else but my own heart beating out of sync. She saw me. Her gaze met mine in the mirror's reflection, and in that instant everything changed. The smile disappeared. Her face went pale. She hung up the call immediately, like someone caught doing something wrong who still tries to save face. The silence that followed was unbearable. I didn't scream, I didn't curse, I didn't make a scene, I just stood there, motionless, trying to breathe, trying to understand how that was happening inside my own home, in the middle of the chaos that my life already was. "It's not what you think," she said, almost automatically. That cliché phrase that, when it appears, already confirms everything. I laughed. A nervous, broken laugh with no humor at all, because at that moment, I realized how obvious everything had been. The signs, the changes, the coldness, the excuses, everything was there, all the time. I just didn't want to see it. "How long?" I asked. My voice came out strange, lower than I expected. She hesitated, looked at the floor, ran her hand through her hair. Every second of silence was a new stab. "A while," she replied. "A while." Two vague words, seemingly weightless, but carrying weeks, maybe months of lies, of hidden conversations, of laughter that wasn't with me, of emotional support that, ironically, she had found in someone else while I was falling apart. I felt a strong pressure in my chest, as if someone was squeezing my heart with both hands. I sat on the edge of the bed, too weak to stand. The bed that, until recently, was our space. Now, it seemed like invaded territory. "Why?" was all I could manage to say. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a speech. She said she was confused, that she felt alone, that she needed attention, that I was distant, that the phase was difficult, that she didn't know how to deal with it all. Each of her justifications seemed to push the blame onto me, as if the fact that I was emotionally broken had been an invitation for her to look for someone more whole, as if my fragility was an unforgivable flaw. I listened to everything in silence, not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to fight, too tired to try to prove that I was also there, that I was also suffering, that I also needed support. When she finished, she looked at me, waiting for some reaction. Maybe an explosion, maybe tears, maybe a plea for her to stay. I only felt a huge emptiness. "So that's it?" I asked. "The moment I needed you the most, you decided to leave, even while staying?" She didn't answer, and that absence of an answer said more than any word. She said she needed some time, that she didn't know what she wanted, that the situation was too confusing. And in the middle of all this, she did something that deeply marked me. She packed a few things, put them in a bag, and said she was going to a friend's house. There was no genuine apology. There was no attempt to fix things. There was no concern for my emotional state. There was just a hurried exit, as if she was getting rid of a burden. I sat on the bed, looking at the empty space beside me, trying to understand how someone who claimed to love me had managed to abandon me with such ease, with such coldness, with such haste. When the door closed, the sound echoed through the apartment like a final period. I stayed there for a long time. I don't know how long. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. The world continued outside, functioning normally, while mine had just stopped. The humiliation came later, not just because of the betrayal itself, but because of the awareness that it had happened while I was at the bottom, while I was struggling to stay on my feet. While I believed that at least there I was safe, I felt small, insufficient, replaceable, and that night alone in the apartment that now seemed too big, I understood a painful truth. The love I thought had saved me was the same one that pushed me further down. I had no idea how to get out of there. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. I didn't even know if I wanted to. I only knew that something inside me had broken in a way that couldn't be undone, and the worst was yet to come. After the door closed, silence ceased to be just the absence of sound. It became a presence, a heavy, suffocating presence that occupied every corner of the apartment and every thought in my head. I sat there, on the edge of the bed, looking at the empty space where she used to sleep, trying to understand when my life had gone off the rails like that. I got up at some point, I don't know exactly when. I walked aimlessly around the house, like someone who lost their destination halfway. I went through the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, and everything seemed out of place, even though it was exactly as it had always been. The cup she used to use was still in the sink. The towel hanging behind the door still smelled like her. Every detail was a silent reminder that I had been left behind. I tried to eat something, but my stomach refused to cooperate. My body was there, but it seemed disconnected from my mind. It was as if I were watching my own life from the outside, unable to truly interact. I sat on the living room floor, leaning against the couch, and stayed there for an indefinite time, hugging my knees, trying to breathe deeply so as not to completely collapse. That night I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I was too empty to cry. The tears were trapped somewhere inside me, along with the feeling of humiliation and abandonment. I felt deceived, discarded, as if all the effort I had made to maintain that relationship had been irrelevant the moment I stopped being convenient. The following days were a blur. I woke up with no desire to get up, but I got up anyway, because lying down was even worse. Work became a place where I existed on autopilot. I answered what they asked, performed basic tasks, but my head was always somewhere else. I forgot simple things, made mistakes on details I used to master, and that only increased the feeling of failure. At times, I caught myself reliving the discovery scene, like a movie repeating non-stop. Her smile, the other man's voice, the quick way she hung up the call. Each repetition was accompanied by a new feeling of revolt, sadness, disbelief. I wondered how someone can betray without seeming to carry any guilt, how someone can sleep peacefully knowing they left the other person on the floor, and along with that came the guilt. Not hers, but mine. I wondered what I could have done differently. If I had been stronger, more cheerful, more successful, more confident, maybe she would have stayed. Maybe she wouldn't have looked elsewhere for what I couldn't offer at that moment. These thoughts gnawed at me, even though I knew deep down that love shouldn't work as a conditional exchange. There was a day when I simply couldn't leave the house. The alarm clock rang, I turned it off, turned over, and stared at the wall. Hours passed, and I stayed there, motionless, as if the world outside no longer existed. The phone rang a few times, messages arrived, but I didn't answer. I didn't even have the energy to pretend everything was fine. It was during this period that I came closer to rock bottom than I had ever been. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a silent and dangerous way. I felt irrelevant, useless, as if my existence didn't matter to anyone. And when that kind of thought sets in, it doesn't give a warning. It just stays there, whispering, repeating itself, undermining any shred of hope. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about confrontation. I just wanted the pain to stop. I wanted to sleep and wake up without that weight on my chest. I wanted a day where the first thought wasn't her, the betrayal, the abandonment, but every attempt to distract my mind failed. Everything led me back to the same place. There was a night when I sat on the balcony, looking at the street below, watching people pass by, cars coming and going, lives continuing normally. I felt displaced, as if I had been left behind at a point that only I noticed. And there, in that silence broken only by the distant noise of the city, I asked myself a question that hurt more than any other. If I disappeared now, would anyone miss me? The question was not accompanied by a comforting answer. It was accompanied by an even greater emptiness. It was in this state that the days continued to pass, one after the other, all very similar. Pain, exhaustion, loneliness, no message from her, no attempt at contact, nothing. As if I had been erased with the same ease with which someone deletes a number from their phone. And little by little, I started to notice something strange. In the middle of that rock bottom, in the middle of all that darkness, there were brief moments when I could breathe a little better, small, almost imperceptible moments, like when I managed to go for a walk for a few minutes, or when I managed to finish a simple task at work. They were tiny victories, but they were real. I still didn't know it, but those small moments were the beginning of something different. Not a miraculous recovery, not a grand turnaround. It was just the most basic instinct there is, the will to keep living, to keep standing, even without fully understanding why. I was still at the bottom, deeply at the bottom, but for the first time since she left, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the end of my story. These small moments started appearing more frequently, almost as if my body was trying to remind me of something my mind had forgotten. It wasn't strength, it wasn't courage, it was just exhaustion from suffering all the time, a fatigue so great that, instead of pulling me down, it started pushing me forward, even if I didn't know exactly where to go. In the beginning, it was almost imperceptible. One day I made the bed. The next, I washed the dishes that had been piling up for days. Simple, mundane things that used to seem too big for me to do, but each small action had a strange effect. For a few minutes, the pain became a little quieter. It didn't disappear, but it gave me space to breathe. I started leaving the house without a clear objective. I walked through the nearby streets without headphones, without music, just observing the world. People talking, children playing, someone laughing loudly at a bar table. That reminded me that life kept happening, even when mine seemed to be on pause, and somehow that bothered me less than before. The most curious thing is that I no longer thought about her all the time, not because I had moved on, but because my mind seemed too busy trying to reorganize itself. The memories still came, but not with the same force. It was as if the wound was starting to heal inside, even though it still hurt to the touch. I stopped checking my phone, waiting for a message. At some point I just got tired. Tired of waiting for an explanation that wouldn't come. Tired of wishing for a regret that might never exist. And that tiredness was liberating in a strange way. For the first time since the betrayal, I started to accept that some answers I would never have, and that had to be enough. At work I started concentrating a little more. Not because I was motivated, but because it was a way to keep my mind busy. I threw myself into tasks, solved problems, stayed longer than necessary. It wasn't healthy, I knew, but it was a start. At least I wasn't standing still anymore. It was in this phase that I realized something important. No one was coming to save me. There would be no miraculous message, no transformative apology, no emotional reunion that would put everything back in place. If anything was going to change, it had to come from me. And that idea, while frightening, also gave me back a little control. I started taking better care of myself, but without big plans. No exaggerated promises, no motivational speeches. I just started doing the bare minimum. Eating better some days, sleeping a little earlier, going back to exercising even if it was just a short walk. Each gesture was small, almost insignificant, but added up they created a new feeling that I was no longer completely lost. And most importantly, I did all this in silence. I didn't tell anyone I was trying to get better. I didn't post anything. I didn't seek validation. I didn't want to prove anything to anyone, not even to her. That reconstruction was mine alone, and for the first time in a long time that made me feel like I owned myself. Sometimes the memory of her still came strong. Sometimes anger arose out of nowhere. Other times sadness returned without warning. But I started to understand that this was part of it, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, but learning to live with what happened without letting it define who I was. Months passed, not spectacularly, but constantly, and little by little, things started to fall into place. I felt firmer, more present. People around me started noticing subtle changes. Comments like, "You look different," or "You're calmer," popped up occasionally. I heard them, but didn't give them much importance. I knew how internal that process had been. I still carried scars, but they no longer hurt all the time. And at some point along this silent path, I realized I was at peace with something that once seemed unbearable, the idea of moving on without her. It was exactly when I started to feel this peace that something unexpected happened. On a normal afternoon, one of those that promises nothing, my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen without rushing, without expectation, and when I saw her name, I felt a chill run through my body. Not the desperation from before, not the tightness in my chest. It was something different. A brief shock followed by a distant curiosity. The message was simple, too short for everything that had been left unresolved between us. "Hi, can we talk?" I stared at that phrase for a few seconds, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Months ago, that message would have been everything I wanted. It would have made me run, beg, wait for any crumb of attention. But now I was someone else. And at that moment, even before replying, I knew that conversation wouldn't be about going back. It would be about closing something that, finally, no longer held me captive. I didn't reply right away. Not to play games, not out of revenge, but because I really needed to understand what that message awakened in me. I put my phone on the table and looked out the window, watching the late afternoon. The sky was changing color slowly, as if the day was saying goodbye without haste. And I realized that, unlike before, the world hadn't stopped because of her. A few hours later, I replied with something simple, Not too emotional, not overly cold, just honesty. We can. We arranged to meet in a neutral place, a small, quiet cafe where no one knew us. I arrived a few minutes early. I sat at a table near the window and waited. Meanwhile, I observed my own thoughts. There was none of that old anxiety, that fear of making a mistake, that desperate hope. There was only curiosity and a strange sense of closure. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her, not physically, but in her energy. She seemed smaller, more tired. Her smile was insecure, and her eyes, which used to avoid mine, now sought me out with a mixture of regret and expectation. She sat across from me, adjusted her bag, took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded. I ordered a coffee. I waited. She started talking quickly, as if she had rehearsed. She said things hadn't turned out as she imagined, that she had made mistakes, that only after losing something do we understand its value. She said she felt alone, that she made bad choices, that she regretted it. She talked about feelings, confusion, longing. As she spoke, I noticed something curious. I didn't feel anger, nor did I feel like hugging her. I felt distance, a calm, safe distance, like someone looking at a place they once lived, but knows they no longer belong there. When she finished, she looked at me, waiting for something. Maybe a speech, maybe an opening, maybe hope. I took a deep breath before speaking, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be fair to myself. "I heard you," I said, "and I believe you regret it, but regret doesn't erase what happened." She tried to say something, but I continued. "When you left, I was at the worst moment of my life. I needed support, not abandonment, and that changed me. Not in a beautiful way at first, but in a definitive way." I talked about the pain, the silence, the rock bottom, not to accuse, but to explain. I explained that I had learned to rebuild myself without her, that I had learned to be alone, that I had learned to respect myself. "Today I'm fine," I said, "not because everything is perfect, but because I no longer depend on someone who left me when I was broken." She cried. The tears fell silently. For the first time, I saw in her the fragility that I had carried alone for so long, and for a second I felt compassion, not love, compassion. "So there's no chance left?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked into her eyes, without anger, without harshness. "There's a chance for you to move on, just like I did, but not with me." We were silent for a few seconds. Then I got up. I paid for the coffee. I said goodbye politely, and I left. As I walked down the street, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. Not because I had defeated someone, but because I had chosen myself. The justice I needed didn't come in the form of revenge, nor humiliation. It came in the form of maturity, boundaries, self-respect. Today, when I look back, I no longer see myself as the defenseless victim I was for a while. I see myself as someone who survived, someone who fell deep, but who found strength not in motivational speeches, not in empty promises, but in small, silent steps taken every day. I learned that those who truly love you don't run away when you are weak. They stay, they hold on, they walk with you. And those who leave at your worst moment don't deserve to come back when you have already rebuilt yourself. If you are listening to this story now and recognize yourself in some part of it, I want you to know one thing. Rock bottom is not the end. It's a painful, dark, lonely place. But it's also a place from which there is only one possible path. Up. Maybe you're still there. Maybe you're halfway. Maybe you've already started climbing without realizing it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you keep going, even slowly, even without being sure, even without support, because one day, just like it happened to me, someone might even come back. But you will realize that you no longer need them, and that will be your true victory. I moved on, and you can too.